Hey class, my name is Caleb Sprinkle, and I reviewed the book For the Glory, Eric Liddell's Journey from Olympic Champion to Modern Martyr by Duncan Hamilton. So Eric Liddell was born in China in 1902 to missionaries James and Mary Liddell. And right when he was born, the Chinese Boxer Rebellion was taking place. Essentially, this is where nationalist militants were seeking to push out any foreign missionaries that were there. So, right out of the gate, from birth to early childhood, Eric saw just the perseverance needed to be a missionary, the resolve it was going to take. His parents really modeled that well for him. As a kid and up to college, he excelled academically, but also athletically. When he was at the University of Edinburgh, he competed in several track meets and not only won, but set some school records. And that really set him on a trajectory to start training for the Olympics. And he was known not only for his just unique running style. They actually called him the Flying Scotsman. He would run very unorthodox, his arms flailing, his head tilted back. That's just not how you run a track meet. But that was who he was, and he was really good at it. But he was known not only for that, but his character as well. Before every meet, he would shake hands, offer tips to runners, which you don't really do that when you're trying to beat them. But he cared about people. He was still highly competitive, but he loved being nice to people. His growing fame it gave him a platform for some early ministry as well. He joined an evangelist group and would run while also going on evangelistic tours, always speaking of the glory of God. No matter how good he was, he never really took credit for that. It's just who he was. It's not really clear as to the exact moment when he was converted. He did go on record to say when he had a conversation with his sister once, she was just encouraging him to speak boldly about Jesus. And he said, those words helped me make my decision. And since then, I've endeavored to do the work of the master. So, not super clear as if that was the moment of conversion or just the realization that Jesus was Lord of his life. And news about Eric spread. Really most significant is when he ran for the 1924 Olympics in Paris, and the event that he was supposed to run, the 100-meter, it was slated for a Sunday, and Eric refused to run that because that was the Lord's Day, and he wanted to be obedient to Jesus and not run on the Lord's Day, and so he passed that up. And the Olympic board was furious with him, and so with his team, but he was persistent in not doing that. And instead of running the 100-meter, he started training for the 400-meter. And he was not a 400-meter runner, but he decided to run it. The odds were against him, and he ended up winning. And that that actually, I would say, gave him more fame than if he had just run the 100-meter. But really, God used that to turn the sports world upside down by him ceasing to run what he was supposed to do, ended up doing a run that he was supposed to lose. So it's really cool. After that, he immediately went to China and served as a missionary there, kind of taking in the footsteps of his parents. He met his wife there, Florence, and then they had their first daughter a year later. 2 years later, and then a year after that, they had another daughter. So he served originally just teaching science classes and Bible studies in Chinese college. Then he started doing some more evangelistic tours there. But it was starting to get pretty hostile. This was around World War II when he was there, when he went there in 1925. And then 20 years later, as they're still there, the Japanese were advancing in China and creating hostile environments for foreign missionaries. And it got so dangerous at one point that he had to send his wife and girls off to Canada where they would be safe. And he didn't know this, but that would be the last time he would see them. And after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese presence was so bad in China that they started rounding up all the foreign military that were positioned there to protect foreign missionaries. They rounded them up, and man, life and the environment got pretty rough for them. So much so that the Japanese pushed out most missionaries, Eric included, to internment camps, and that's where he found himself in March of 1943. Was a Japanese internment camp, and he was a missionary without a mission. Someone quoted him saying that. But so when he was in the internment camp, it seemed hopeless, but he wasn't. He still served. He was known as Uncle Eric to a lot of kids there. He taught Bible studies and coached sports and planned worship service. He was faithful to loving and speaking truth to over 300 kids there. And despite how busy he was, he never neglected time with the Father. And in time, when the spirit of the camp became more weary, people started stealing food and fighting with others. But Eric was there interceding to teach people, love your neighbor, especially your enemies, which is a hard message to receive, considering that the Japanese guards were pretty rough to these internees. But he didn't stop. He continued to love people, even to the very end, when he died from or he suffered a stroke and died from a brain tumor. And even in his dying breath, he talked about the need to surrender everything we are to God, to a woman in particular. Her name was Joyce. His life was characterized by the glory of God. And really three things that I saw that came out of this book for me. One was just the integrity that characterized his life. He was the same person in quiet as he was in public. He loved Jesus, and he loved people more than himself. One example in particular is there were a couple guys that were dying, and he put them in a wheelbarrow and carted them across the countryside. And it was dangerous countryside, and there was enemy fire. But he said, "Look, if I didn't do this, these guys would have died." He just cared about people. Second thing is the resolve and the perseverance that it takes in the Christian life, something that he modeled so well. Man, to lose your family like that. Sorry if you hear a bark, that's my dog. But to lose his family like that, never to see them again. And both him and his wife saying, man, the gospel is so needed here. So you stay back, Eric. Man, his life was characterized by suffering, and he didn't really allow that to stop him. But if anything, it fueled him. He loved lost people, and didn't matter what would happen to him in this life, because he knew the eternal ramifications of people without Christ. That drove him. And the last thing really is he trusted fully in the providence and the sovereignty of God. The first example with him not running that race, choosing to obey Jesus and to take the Lord's day and not to do games or anything. And God actually used that to further his God's name even more by him obeying the Lord in that way. And then second, by staying back in China and allowing his family to leave. God was going to use him in an incredible way in that camp. And man, what an amazing guy, amazing missionary. Definitely where we can take some notes from this man about suffering, but truly his legacy was unparalleled, and he did everything to the glory of God. So